Hey. Yeah. I know it's Wednesday, but look, I'm in the middle of something very important right now. Very important business stuff. Okay, yes, I'm playing Destiny, but it's okay. Look, I've been uploading non-stop for like the past year. I'm sure Crispy's Tavern can go without one Tabletop Tavern tips video. It's all good. Wait, what? Wait, don't do that. Don't! Seriously? Fine. Make the rogue video. Alright, I've pulled myself away from my one true love to talk about my other true love, Dungeons and Dragons. More specifically, rogues in Dungeons and Dragons. I love warlocks, but rogues are another class that I just vibe with. Rogues are awesome, but I so often see them get crapped on. In these RPG horror stories, people nerf rogues, ban rogues, and obviously these horror stories are an irregularity. They're not the norm, but rogues are one of those classes that often get joked about as the overpowered class, or even the class that no one wants to play because they're too edgy. But I don't think that's the case. Rogues are awesome. They can add a lot to your game. So just like warlocks, like 2 months ago, let's talk about rogues, what they can add to your D&D campaign in terms of story and roleplay, as well as what you can do to make sure that they work in your campaign, avoiding many of the pitfalls that we often see associated with rogues. Without further ado, let's get started. For starters, what can rogues add to your D&D campaign? I mean, sure, the normal mechanical stuff. Rogues are good damage dealers, rogues are good for utility, etc., but what about from a story point of view? They don't have an immediate hook into roleplay like a warlock with their patron, so what can they add? Well, for starters, the criminal background that's often associated with rogues is super cool. You want a good roleplay hook, this is where it's at. Now, of course, not every rogue is going to take the criminal background, and that's actually a mistake that we're going to talk about later down the line. But if you are one of the many rogues who does decide to have them be part of a criminal organization or have them have criminal contacts, then those contacts can be great hooks into roleplay, very similar to the eldritch horrors associated with warlocks. Except here, it's much more down to earth, much more human. It's way easier for the DM to implement a conversation with a criminal contact than for the DM to implement a conversation with an eldritch horror from beyond the multiverse. Criminal contacts can act as information, quest givers, vendors. I mean, they serve so many purposes, just like any NPC. However, unlike many NPCs, they are directly tied to the rogue through a background that many rogues take, the criminal background. Now, I have seen many rogues take the criminal background and just never use their criminal contact, or I've seen many DMs just never implement it. And I think that that is a massive waste. So many rogues go with this background, and one of the main perks of it is the contact. So, not implementing it, I think you're really missing a trick. It's a really easy hook for the rogue to get into the roleplay and can act as an interesting story beat for the rest of the party. Rogues also often have backstories associated with underground or underworld portions of your world, the criminal element. Now, like I said, not every rogue needs to be like this, but a lot of rogues are. And this is another thing that I often see DMs and players not take advantage of. Some of my favorite films are based on this criminal underground organization form of storytelling. The Godfather, The Sting, The Irishman, other movies that don't start with D. But seriously, I love these type of films, and they can work great as inspiration for a D&D game if you use the rogue's backstory as a hook. So many rogues associate their characters with a criminal background. Not taking advantage of that is just like not taking advantage of the criminal contact. It's just missing a trick. It's doing yourself a disservice. This is interesting stuff that can act as a break from the main story of your campaign or assist in the main story of your campaign. Maybe the rogue's organization is a smuggling ring and the party need them to assist with moving a high-value artifact from point A to point B. Think moving the Horn of Orcus in Critical Role Campaign 1, but instead of using a fancy airship, you're using a criminal organization that's directly tied to a character's backstory. It makes them feel all the more part of this world. While the rogue's roleplay hooks are not as obvious as the warlocks, it's not baked right into the class, the stereotypical and often used criminal background for rogues is awesome. It makes them really interesting, and it can open up new avenues in your campaign through the underground criminal organizations of the world. If your rogue goes with a criminal background, then it is something that you can absolutely use, and something that if you don't use, I think you're really missing a trick. Alright, so mistakes. Well, mistake number one, and this is going to make me sound really confusing, but going with a criminal background is not the only avenue you can take a rogue. Yes, it is the most commonly used one, and yes, it is an awesome avenue you can take your character, but rogues don't have to be criminals. Sure, their subclasses are called assassin and thief, so they're associated with criminals, but they don't have to be criminals. You could be an assassin working for the church, doing unsavory deeds in the name of the law and order. You could be a thief who's stealing for the crown, somebody who sneaks into enemy kingdoms to steal away important documents. Rogues don't have to work for the shifty and the shady. They can also work for the lawful. That is a great avenue to take your character. And just like with the criminal background, you can also use those backstories to create interesting roleplay hooks. Something that I don't cover enough is that these roleplay hooks can come from anywhere. Any aspect of your backstory can be turned into something that can be added into the campaign. Some are more obvious than others, and some are more easy to implement than others, but everything is valid and can be used in the campaign just fine. Don't feel like you're forced to make your character a criminal if you don't want them to be. Rogues are just people who attack from the shadows, take advantage of their enemies' weaknesses, and are stealthy, etc., etc. They don't need to be criminals. Another mistake that we see often, and one that is pretty stereotypical, but it is something I see the most with rogues for some reason, it's edginess. It's the loner syndrome. You don't want to be the lone wolf. Remember, you're playing this game with a group, and the worst way you can interact with that group is to not interact with them at all. The rogue can be isolated. They can be a loner. I've made plenty of isolated, socially awkward characters, but I still interact with the rest of the party because that's where a lot of the fun of D&D comes from. I just make those interactions more stiff, more awkward, but I'm still interacting, and over time, my character opens up more to the party because that's usually how people work. Kind of associated with this, but your rogue also doesn't need to be edgy. I know I said a lot of things about killing from the shadows and taking advantage of your enemy's weaknesses earlier, and that sounds pretty edgy, because it is, but rogues don't need to have that demeanor. Escafé is the rogue in my current Seafaring campaign, and she is the opposite of edgy. She's super bubbly, super chaotic, super funny, super cheerful all the time. Just because Eska is a rogue doesn't mean she has to sit at the bow of the ship brooding all the time. She can be active and bubbly and funny because that's the way she wrote her character. Rogue, again, doesn't need to be associated with certain character tropes. If you want to think outside the box and change it up, that's perfectly fine. If you want to stay inside those stereotypes, make a criminal, edgy rogue, that's also fine. Both can be made interesting. And that's all I've got for you. If one of your party chooses to play a rogue, you should count yourself lucky. Rogues are awesome. If you choose to play a rogue, then, well, have fun, because rogues are a great class to play, and in a story sense, they offer a lot of opportunities. I hope that I helped you guys to perfect your rogue role-playing and maybe break a little bit of that rogue hate I've been seeing going around. If you guys enjoyed this episode of Tabletop Tavern Tips and want to let me know, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then please do subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own tips or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave a comment that's criminal to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.